This is a really good introduction to ancient Greece. This is on page 140. We are, almost all of us, descended from people who responded to the dangers of existence by inventing stories about unpredictable or disgruntled deities. For a long time, the human instinct to understand was thwarted by facile religious explanations, as in ancient Greece in the time of Homer, where there were gods of the sky and the earth, the thunderstorm, the oceans and the underworld, fire and time and love and war, where every tree and meadow had its dryad and menad. So again, this is pantheism, which is the belief that there are gods in everything and how things work, how a river flows, how a tree grows, how the sun comes up. Their energy, their motivation for moving, their essence or their ghost in the machine is a god. Every single one, everything that, I don't know about every leaf, but the wind, all these things. What is their power and energy? Why do they move? Why do they have a nature? Why do they do certain things and not others? For the longest time, this was all personified. It was believed that there is an intelligence behind it. And of course, you can see that in even modern religion too, with creationism. How could we have existed? There must be some intelligence behind even the rise of the human race. It's a view that does not consider evolution or time and how things could have evolved through that process, that whole process of evolution. Now, what's interesting is in the next couple pages here, he talks about Thales, who was the father of science in ancient Greece. He talks about Anaximander, who actually had early ideas of evolution. We tend to think that Darwin was the first one to discuss evolution, but it wasn't. Almost everything started in ancient Greece. So this is on page 144. Anaximander argued that we are so helpless at birth that if the first human infants had been put into the world on their own, they would immediately have died. From this, Anaximander concluded that human beings arose from other animals with more self-reliant newborns. He proposed that the spontaneous origin of life in mud, the first animals being fish covered with spines. Some descendants of these fishes eventually abandoned the water and moved to dry land, where they evolved into other animals by the transmutation of one form into another. He believed in an infinite number of worlds, all inhabited, and all subject to cycles of dissolution and regeneration. Nor, as St. Augustine ruefully complained, did he, any more than Thales, attribute the cause of all this ceaseless activity to a divine mind, of course, which Augustine would have wanted to have the answer to be the divine mind to create everything, but Anaximander said, oh no, this is just a process of a long time, many years of evolution. Isn't that so curious how all this stuff came out of ancient Greece and yet how little is studied today? And now this is on the next page on 145. This is from Hippocrates. And Hippocrates wrote, men think epilepsy divine merely because they do not understand it. But if they called everything divine, which they do not understand, why, there would be no end of divine things. So this is what sometimes is called the God of the gaps. If we have a gap in our knowledge, and we just throw God in there, and then it gives a kind of psychological safety that something is controlling that process. And because we worship that God, just as they used to worship pantheistic gods, if we worship a God who's supposed to control everything, then there's a sense in which we will not be victims of random acts of violence or evil, that we have some at least you could say the rudiments of karma. We have some control over the world if we worship what does control it. So those kinds of gods are injected into what we don't understand, again, for this psychological mechanism of comfort. So, for example, there's a horrible storm or like a tornado. Can you imagine not knowing what a tornado is, and you look outside your window and you've never seen it's been windy, but you've never seen a crazy tornado, and all of a sudden one appears. You would think the world's going mad. You would think of something. You would be hysterical. It'd be crazy and insane. This massive thing doing all this destruction. No wonder primitive tribes would have thought that this was an act of aggression by some god, because of course, for the purposes of human psychology, they want to believe that all these things are controlled by something. It would cause a great amount of insanity, I think, in the human race if there was such a thing that was considered to not have a cause and could strike at any moment, and there was nothing that we can do about it. As far as I can think, there is nothing like that we know of at this time. There is nothing, like you might say, what about the onset of cancer, which we don't really know the causes? At least we can study cancer. It's not just anything. What I'm talking about is some kind of metaphysical magic. Something like all of a sudden a person turns into an elephant, or all of a sudden they cease to exist, or something like that. There is a metaphysical stability in this reality. If there wasn't, that would be inimical to human psychology. You would not be able to be sane in such a world. But because the universe has an order to it, we can always understand what's going on. We may inject a god for the time being to understand something, but ultimately through science, we can discover what is its cause. An event having a cause is important because it is the basis of human sanity. If there were no such things as cause and effects metaphysically, I don't think human psychology would be possible. Human race wouldn't be possible. I don't think anything would be possible, probably by definition, if the universe was so unstable and erratic. So on the same page on 145, he mentions air. He says, there was once a time when hardly anyone believed in air. They knew about breathing, of course, and they thought the wind was the breath of the gods. But the idea of air as a static material but invisible substance was unimagined.
So now on page 150, this is a very brief point, but I think it's worth mentioning. This is about Pythagoras. It was he who first used the word cosmos to denote a well-ordered and harmonious universe, a world amendable to human understanding. This is an important point because for the longest time also it was believed that the world could not be understood, especially coming out of Plato. Plato, of course, denounced the senses as something as valid, and thought the world was illusory, just like the Plato's cave. If you look at that, the allegory of the cave. But for the longest time, along the same lines, it was believed that this world is temporary and really not the best place to be. The best place to be would be in heaven with the gods in the afterlife. And so then you have people like Pythagoras saying that, no, I think the world can be understood. I think we can live here. We can find happiness. And this is our life. And we have the capacity as humans to understand the world. It's a different, again, outlook onto our situation as human beings in this world. And that's, of course, where this word cosmos comes from. Cosmos, the universe, the physical part of the universe that, according to Pythagoras, we are able to grasp and understand. We have the capacity to do so. This next point on page 151, I think, is fantastic, and it's really against a lot of authoritarianism that goes on in intellectual circles and in religions, of course. This is by Cicero. So I'll begin. This is a quote from, I'm not sure what the source is, but it is Cicero's quote. In discussion, it is not so much weight of authority as force of argument that should be demanded. Indeed, the authority of those who profess to teach is often a positive hindrance to those who desire to learn. They cease to employ their own judgment and take what they perceive to be the verdict of their chosen master as settling the question. In fact, I am not disposed to approve the practice traditionally ascribed to the Pythagoreans, who, when questioned as to the grounds of any assertion that they advanced in debate, are said to have been accustomed to reply, "The master said so," the master being Pythagoras. So potent was an opinion already decided, making authority prevail unsupported by reason. That's a fantastic quote, and of course affects all kinds of things. All kinds of intellectual circles are affected by some intellectual who started the circle, and it's hard for the followers or disciples to get away from that thinker's large statue kind of thing, and that they're stuck in his or her shadow. And what should really rule the day is not that authority. Disciples should not try to be simply copies of who they're discipling, but rather they should move the banner forward, move reason forward, and that reason should win the day, not authority. But if authority wins the day, then progress stops. And I think it's ridiculous to think that any thinker has said all that needs to be said on a topic, and that has never been true. And how could that possibly be true today? Some people say that Aristotle was a great thinker, but no one believes that Aristotle had everything right. Nor Aristotle missed some things, and he made some errors. That can be equally applied to other people today, any other thinkers today. So I think that's a fantastic quote from Cicero, who was a Roman statesman, I think. I should also just mention briefly, I'm at the middle of the book now. There's some really nice color, what are they called? Plates? They're called plates in the book, but there's some really nice colored plates in here. So on page 157, now he's talking about Aristarchus. Aristarchus of Samos, you may know, was actually, many people think this was Copernicus, but Aristarchus of Samos was the first one to discover the heliocentric model of the solar system. For the longest time, it was believed that the Earth was at the center of our solar system and all the planets go around us. And it was also still believed that Copernicus was the one who did the mathematics and figured out, because for the longest time Mars would travel and then it would back up and then it would keep going. And people tried to make all kinds of crazy theories of how that could be possible. All these different there's a machine that was used that had all these circles around it trying to chart Mars, but Aristarchus of Samos was the one who actually figured it out first, but it was forgotten, I guess. But Copernicus figured it out again. But there's a really good quote here, again, about decentering man as being the created being, and the world revolves around us, of course. The great legacy of Aristarchus is this. This is on page 157. Neither we nor our planet enjoys a privileged position in nature. And then he says a bit further down in the paragraph, I wonder if its social extrapolation is a major reason for attempts at its suppression. Attempts to suppress that idea of the heliocentric model, any attempts to, same with evolution, all attempts to get rid of or suppress the idea of man being part of a process and not intendedly created or intended to have some centered position in the universe, is being suppressed because of what Sagan calls social extrapolation. It's the idea of people losing their faith and becoming crazy animals. There's all kinds of, and I think it's somewhat justified. There's a lot of people who think that if, for example, it was discovered, here's another one. There's I'm not sure if it's called the conspiracy theory, maybe. It's out of Da Vinci Code. There's that idea of whether Jesus had a wife and whether that one person beside Jesus is not whoever they say it is. It's actually Mary Magdalene, and that was actually his wife. If that were to be determined true, if there was some way that we could determine that to be true today, would people go insane, is the question. And that very fear, that very question was asked and dealt with by people in the past when Galileo was talking about his stuff, Copernicus was talking about his stuff, even Aristotle, what they did with Socrates, right? They killed Socrates over this kind of same thing, in a sense that knowledge should be suppressed, or in a sense delivered in tiny packages, because if we shock society with new knowledge, it will create social unrest. And so these major decentering periods in human history have been a very cautious change in fear of major social unrest. So I just thought that was fascinating and something that we still deal with today. There's all kinds of things that you could think of, like what if it were true? What if it could be proven true that of something? How would that affect society? So it's I think it's interesting because it's still affecting us today.